How can a mere 3-foot wave trigger a localized tsunami?
Swallow a woman whole while leaving a single cushion completely untouched.
On April 4th, Brian Hooker claimed the Atlantic Ocean snatched his wife, Lynette, away from their small dinghy as she struggled to swim 1,000 feet back to their sailboat, the Soulmate.
He insists a rogue wave pushed him away. He insists he could not jump in, but detectives are no longer looking at the ocean. They are looking closely at the digital.
Breadcrumbs left behind in the dark, because the sea cannot hide secrets from the Coast Guard cyber forensics team. And what they just recovered from the boat's onboard navigation computer changes everything.
The darkest secrets are always hidden in the data.
If you crave deep investigative breakdowns that look
Past the headlines and straight into the cold forensics, hit subscribe now. Let us examine the evidence together to understand how a criminal investigation can be turned completely upside down by a single piece of marine technology. We first must dissect the makeup of a perfect alibi, or more accurately,
an alibi engineered to sound flawless to anyone who has never set foot on the open ocean.
On the morning of April 4th, the vast shimmering waters off the coast became the setting for a highly unusual sequence of events, utterly detached from the laws of survival, that it instantly raised red flags for maritime law enforcement. Brian Hooker stood before detectives and spun a story of a sudden, catastrophic accident. He claimed he and his wife Lynette were out on the water in their small 8-foot dinghy, a secondary craft, usually used for quick trips between the shore and their main home. On the water, a sleek twin-cabin sailboat fittingly named the Soulmate. According to Brian, they were about 1,000 feet from the Soulmate when the weather turned hostile without warning. He told investigators that a sudden, sharp 3-foot wave hit the side of their small dinghy. In the maritime world, a 3-foot wave is a normal everyday event, a minor swell that any experienced sailor handles with routine ease. Yet, Brian insisted this minor swell had enough sudden, violent force to throw Lynette over the gunwale and into the sea. In behavioral profiling and forensic analysis alike, we search for anomalies in human behavior. When a person is knocked into the water from a small boat, the laws of physics dictate a very specific reaction. An 8-foot dinghy is extremely light. For an adult to be violently thrown over the side, the laws of counterleverage usually cause the dinghy itself to capsize, or at the very least, take on a massive amount of water. Yet Brian's boat remained fully afloat. It was not swamped. It was not capsized. But it is the timeline of events immediately after Lynette entered the water where his story begins to fracture under basic logic. Brian claimed that instead of panicking or sinking, Lynette quickly oriented herself in the ocean and started swimming toward the Soulmate. A distance of 1,000 feet. To put that in perspective, 1,000 feet is over 3 football fields of open, unpredictable ocean water. Even for a world-class Olympic athlete, in professional gear, swimming 300 yards against open ocean currents is grueling. An exhausting, near-impossible feat in heavy, standard, everyday clothing. It triggers an instant battle with hypothermia, sheer panic, and exhaustion. Then came the slip-up. That made veteran Coast Guard investigators stop cold. Brian claimed that while his wife fought for her life, a sudden freak tsunami, a massive localized surge of water slammed into his 8-foot dinghy. This colossal wall of water, he claimed, threw his small craft way off course, dragging him further and further from his drowning wife. Using that specific word, tsunami, is a profound psychological pattern break. In professional crime forensics, when a suspect adopts highly extreme, overly dramatic language to paint a routine weather event, they are usually trying to fabricate an unstoppable force of nature, an act of God so immense
that it makes their inaction seem entirely excusable.
Because pay close attention to Brian Hooker's next move.
Or more accurately, what he refused to do. In marine crises, human instinct is binary.
You either plunge straight into the waves to rescue your loved one, or you use your vessel's motor to aggressively close the distance.
Brian did neither. He insisted the rogue wave made steering the dinghy back to her impossible.
He swore he couldn't dive in. Instead, as he watched his wife drift out into the vast Atlantic Ocean,
Brian reached down, seized a single white foam seat cushion, and threw it into the waves, hoping it would drift to her as a makeshift life preserver. When the Coast Guard eventually recovered that exact cushion, it wasn't waterlogged.
it wasn't shredded by rough seas. It floated peacefully, an isolated piece of foam, carrying the massive weight of an impossible story.
Absolutely no one who knew the ocean believed him.
Seasoned sailors do not lose sight of a swimmer 1,000 feet away while running a motorboat unless there is a conscious decision to let the gap grow.
Every time the detectives dug deeper and matched his story against the hard physical reality of ocean currents,
wind speeds and vessel weight calculations for April 4th, they found more lies.
Blatant lies.
his story was built on a foundation of sand, designed to explain away a disappearance without leaving any trace of foul play.
Had the sea swallowed Lynette Hooker whole, washing away every single piece of physical evidence from those critical and dark moments,
Brian Hooker might have successfully pulled off the ultimate unprovable tragedy.
he planned for the wind. He accounted for the waves and even factored in the delay for emergency rescue response times,
Knowing full well that ocean searches can drag on for days.
But Brian Hooker is an old-school thinker operating in a modern, hyper-connected digital world. He forgot that modern boats are no longer just wood, fiberglass, and metal. They are living, breathing data hubs.
Once the Coast Guard called off the search and rescue mission and officially opened a criminal investigation,
They didn't just rebuild the missing wife's final timeline.
they towed the Soulmate sailboat into a secure, heavily guarded dock.
They weren't just hunting for blood, fibers, or signs of a physical struggle on deck. Instead, they brought in experts who do not hunt for DNA,
But in silicon and software, the elite Coast Guard Cyber Forensics Unit.
as the digital team squeezed into the cramped cabin of the Soulmate.
They walked right past the living quarters, heading straight for the vessel's electronic pulse.
First, they unbolted the onboard navigation computers. Then, they pulled the central processing units. They plugged custom diagnostic hardware directly into the ship's internal data buses. Brian believed that once the ripples on the water faded, his fabricated story would become the absolute truth.
But the moment technicians booted up their extraction software,
Scraping thousands of lines of raw code from the ship's internal flash drive, they uncovered something absolutely incredible.
this sailboat had not just been sitting idle, waiting for that dinghy to return.
Its internal systems had been quietly logging every single turn of the helm, every sudden electrical surge, and every exact coordinate with microscopic precision.
And as that first wave of recovered data flashed onto investigator screens,
The entire timeline Brian had so carefully constructed began shattering in real time. Because as the tech investigators dug deeper into the hidden GPS logs, they flagged a terrifying anomaly. The vessel was not drifting helplessly at all. It was being systematically, deliberately steered. The sudden shift from a standard maritime search
Rescue mission to a high-stakes technology-driven criminal investigation.
happens the very second physical evidence goes cold and digital forensics starts to speak. For weeks, the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Atlantic Ocean served as the primary crime scene. Divers scanned the reefs, Coast Guard cutters mapped out the surface currents, and spotter planes traced thousands of miles of open sea,
hunting for any trace of Lynette Hooker.
But the ocean is a master at wiping away tracks.
It washes away DNA, scatters chemical evidence,
leaving investigators staring at a blank horizon. But while the water guarded its secrets,
the dual-cabin sailboat named the Soulmate, docked quietly at a secured law enforcement slip, was holding a raw, second-by-second diary of the entire tragedy.
When the Coast Guard's cyber forensics unit entered the cramped wooden cabin of the boat,
they were not searching for physical signs of a struggle.
they left the fingerprinting and bloodstain
analysis entirely to the traditional forensic teams.
instead, they focused on a sleek black console mounted right near the helm.
The ship's main electronics suite, housing the integrated GPS, radar logs, and internal network servers.
To the untrained eye, a luxury sailboat is just a triumph of wind and canvas. But to a tech investigator, it is a complex local area network floating on the water.
Modern boats use a system called NMEA 2000.
This internal network ties every single piece of onboard hardware together.
The radar talks to the GPS, and the GPS guides the autopilot. The autopilot speaks to engine sensors, feeding a constant stream directly into a central flash memory chip hidden inside the main display terminal.
Brian Hooker based his entire defense on the belief that out on the open sea, an alibi is untraceable.
He told investigators that at the moment his wife fell from their 8-foot dinghy, the Soulmate was sitting completely still, securely anchored, drifting only within the small radius allowed by its anchor chain. He claimed he was totally helpless, stranded in a drifting dinghy while his massive sailboat drifted far out of reach, just a distant silhouette on the darkening ocean.
But when the cyber forensics team unbolted the GPS unit and attached extraction clips directly to the board,
they started pulling raw binary data, completely bypassing the user interface.
They were going way past the basic map display that any sailor sees on screen.
They were pulling the raw, unedited telemetry logs, system root files that simply cannot be altered or erased by standard user commands. What they recovered from that silicon chip turned the entire murder investigation upside down. As the first digital map popped up on the investigators' monitors, it did not show a vessel sitting quietly at anchor. Every modern marine system leaves a digital trail, and the Soulmate's track on the morning of April 4th was highly chaotic. Deep GPS logs showed that the sailboat's dual engines had not been idle. The boat's onboard network recorded a massive spike in electrical voltage, proving the twin diesel engines were fired up hours before Brian claimed the accident happened. But the satellite tracking data was even more damning. Modern marine GPS units track much more than just location. They log the exact heading, speed over ground, and even the turn rate,
pinging global navigation satellites multiple times every single minute.
These recovered logs proved that at the exact hour Brian claimed he was stranded in his dinghy, helplessly watching his wife drift away, the Soulmate was running a series of highly calculated, tight, geometric search patterns. The yacht was being steered systematically in a wide, sweeping grid formation. In professional maritime navigation, this exact maneuver is called a sector search, a highly precise, controlled pattern used by captains to locate someone lost in the water.
This single piece of digital evidence completely shattered his timeline to pieces.
If Brian's alibi was actually true, and he was trapped in that 8-foot dinghy, then who was standing at the helm of the Soulmate,
Turning the wheel.
throttling those twin diesel engines to execute a professional search pattern? The boat had no other crew. There were only 2 names registered on the ship's manifest: Brian and Lynette Hooker. The data offered a chillingly simple reality. Either Lynette was already gone while Brian was systematically steering the main sailboat, completely destroying his story about the dinghy accident, or someone else was steering the yacht while the crime went down.
The forensics team dug deep into the system metadata, searching for physical human interaction behind the autopilot.
They immediately pulled the autopilot logs.
Autopilot systems rely entirely on preset coordinates.
But the hard telemetry proved that during those critical hours,
The autopilot had been manually switched off, repeatedly.
A real person had their hands on the wheel, adjusting the throttle.
the onboard system registered the precise mechanical force applied to the rudder linkages,
Outlining a human operator who acted with cold, calculated precision.
as forensic investigators matched the vessel's internal clock
With regional cell tower pings and Starlink satellite logs, they stumbled upon a second, far more unsettling anomaly.
A deep scan of the ship's computer revealed that a manual
System reboot was attempted at exactly 4:12 a.m. the morning she vanished. Someone had accessed the system settings and tried to trigger a factory reset of the navigation history,
hoping to entirely erase the digital footprints before investigators could seize the vessel.
But what this person overlooked is that modern marine tech relies on secret backup partitions in the flash memory.
although the main user logs appeared completely blank on the dashboard.
The deeper telemetry database remained entirely intact, silently saving those ghost coordinates in the dark.
As the second phase of this investigation came to an end,
The story told by Brian Hooker was falling apart at the seams.
The sea currents had not betrayed him.
His own vessel did. Every single coordinate, engine rev, and physical turn of the helm became undeniable mathematical proof of a cover-up.
his digital ghost trail was exposed.
This was no longer a simple missing person case blamed on nature.
They now held a precise map of a calculated deception. And those tracking logs pointed straight to a man who believed the ocean would hide his secrets. We are close to the final forensic breakthrough that turned this entire mystery on its head.
Before we reveal the data,
Make sure to subscribe now so you never miss another deep dive into these haunting true crime archive files.
with the footprint of the deception now completely exposed by the ship's own computer,
The case entered its most grueling and tactical phase.
To the outside world,
High-profile investigations are expected to move at breakneck speed. Once a major lie breaks, people demand sirens, handcuffs, and a swift public trial.
but within the quiet walls of homicide units and Coast Guard intelligence offices,
Exposing a massive lie is just the beginning of the journey. It is a clear signal to slow down, watch from the shadows, and play the long game.
detectives knew precisely what Brian Hooker had pulled off. They had GPS logs showing the Soulmate ran a calculated search pattern while he claimed to be adrift in a raft.
They had battery voltage details showing the diesel engines cranking to life hours before his reported timeline. They even traced the digital footprints of his failed attempt to erase the ship's hard drive at 4:12 a.m. But suspecting guilt and securing a conviction in a real courtroom are two very different hurdles.
especially
when the most crucial piece of physical evidence is still nowhere to be found.
Lynette Hooker herself. In a no-body homicide case, prosecutors face an incredibly steep legal mountain.
Without an official cause of death,
Defense attorneys can easily spin endless alternative theories in court. They can claim the victim staged her own disappearance, simply walked away, or fell victim to some random boating accident. To counter this, detectives had to ensure their digital and circumstantial evidence wasn't just convincing, but mathematically airtight. Every single loophole had to be welded shut before a warrant was signed. That is why, despite the media circus and growing public frustration,
no new details emerged about Brian Hooker's arrest for weeks after the discovery.
the authorities refused to operate on a media deadline. They knew a premature arrest would start a speedy trial clock, forcing the state to present its case before every single piece of forensic data was verified, analyzed,
and transformed into solid courtroom exhibits.
Instead, they left Brian sweating in a silence of his own making. They tracked his movements, watched his patterns, and let him believe, even if only for a brief moment, that his ridiculous story about a freak tsunami and a floating cushion had actually bought him freedom. While Brian stewed in that tense silence, specialist data scientists and maritime engineers were busy turning those digital ghost pings from the Soulmate into an airtight reconstruction of April 4th.
They cross-referenced the ship's own
Internal telemetry with outside data streams that Brian never could have anticipated.
They pulled local ocean current data from national oceanographic databases,
Wind speed logs from nearby weather buoys, and satellite connection logs from the regional Starlink servers that kept the boat connected. When you overlay real ocean currents with a boat's internal GPS logs,
the numbers deliver a definitive verdict.
if a boat is just drifting at anchor, its path perfectly mirrors the natural pull of the tide and push of the wind. But the experts proved the Soulmate was actually cutting right against those prevailing currents. The vessel was actively fighting the sea, driven by human intent and mechanical horsepower. Then, the forensics team achieved a massive breakthrough by matching the exact seconds. The autopilot was manually overridden with the physical layout of the boat's dual helm. By measuring the exact resistance on rudder linkages recorded by the onboard computer, they reconstructed the actual physical effort needed to steer through those tight, repeating grid patterns.
They proved this wasn't some computer glitch or a boat slipping its anchor chain.
It was a deliberate manual operation that required constant human input. The final piece of this digital puzzle came from an incredibly detailed analysis of the ship's electrical power logs. Every time a device is plugged in, a light is turned on, or a power winch is activated on a modern sailboat. The onboard power system records a tiny, microscopic spike in amperage. Detectives found a massive drain on the ship's auxiliary batteries at the exact time Brian claimed he and Lynette were fast asleep below deck. The investigators traced that electric surge straight to the heavy winches, the machinery used to hoist and lower cargo over the ship's side. This digital evidence built an airtight wall. It proved that while Lynette Hooker drifted helplessly into the cold expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, Brian was no helpless bystander trapped inside a battered rescue dinghy. He was the mastermind behind her disappearance, using the heavy machinery of their floating home to seal her fate, then spinning a tragic accident story for the Coast Guard. This case of Lynette Hooker stands as a powerful testament to the massive evolution of modern criminal forensics. The old days of committing a crime and relying on nature's vastness to hide the truth are long gone. A suspect can scrub the decks. They can wipe away every fingerprint.
And they can dump the physical evidence into an ocean trench 3,000 feet deep.
But they can never silence the invisible witnesses built straight into our everyday modern lives.
The microchips, the overhead satellite arrays, the server logs, and internal networks are constantly watching,
constantly recording, and forever preserving the truth. As the final forensic reports are completed and passed to state prosecutors, the tense waiting game draws to a close. Investigators are waiting, armed not with speculation or theory,
but with ironclad mathematical proof.
Brian Hooker believed the deep ocean would wash away his crimes and leave him a perfect alibi. But he forgot that while the sea holds its secrets, the data always speaks for the dead. And very soon, that digital evidence will speak loudest of all before a jury.
Thanks for sticking around. See you in the next video.